welcome to the Extreme Hangout. Thank you all for watching and for being here. My name's Mary Fellows. I am the Fashion Impact Director here at the Extreme Hangout. I'm also CEO and founder of Green With Studio, a sustainable fashion platform. First of all, just want to say thank you, firstly, to the Bedouins who put this tent up and made it possible for us to be here. Secondly, a big thank you to Amber and Al, the founders of Extreme Hangout, and everybody who made this happen. And especially a big thank you to all my panellists who've come to be here today, looking over the sea, which is probably full of microplastics thanks to fashion. This talk is called Utopian Fashion. There's a reason for that. I was driving along thinking, you know, watching out, I'd seen a trailer for a Pixar film, and I was like, imagine if Pixar made a movie about the fashion industry being utopian. It would be like, it's 2062, and the bees are buzzing, and the crops are blowing in the breeze that become the fibres that become our clothes, and the workers have all got rosy, beaming faces, driving their electric vehicles, delivering clothing to different facilities, and all of that clothing is kind, and it puts back to the planet, and fashion is regenerative and fair, and everybody gets paid properly, and it's this sort of wonderful utopia, but is that ever going to happen? And right now, the way that the fashion industry is going, with about 20% of the pollution to the world's water systems is attributable to fashion. It has more emissions than shipping and aviation combined, and it's on course to more or less double the amount of clothing it produces in the next 10 years. It's terrifying. Fashion is full of villains. It's literally like a Shakespearean or a Greek tragedy. It's dark versus light, bad versus good. So if we know that we could get to utopian fashion, and what would it take? And that is the question I've put to my brilliant lineup of panelists here today. Now, I mentioned the sea, so we'll start with the sea, knowing that it is full of these microplastics that come out of the polyester clothing. And for those watching who don't know, polyester and all the other synthetic materials that you'll find listed in your clothing come from, guess who? Fossil fuels. And apparently there's more fossil fuel delegates here at COP27 than there are actual delegates from other organizations, which is terrifying. So if those are some of the evil dark lords of fashion, and their product is choking the oceans, and those microplastics are getting inside the blood-brain barrier, they're in our bodies, these microplastics, in our lungs, in our blood, then what do we do about it? My first question is for Lewis, and if you could just tell us first a bit about what you do, and then I'd love you to tell us, given your experience of working across a lot of sectors, and now particularly in fashion, what fashion should be doing, and what would be your prescription to clean it up?
Okay. Thanks, Mary. Can you all hear me, or do I need a mic?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So my name is Lewis Perkins, and I run an organization called the Apparel Impact Institute. And our mission is to identify, fund, scale, and measure solutions for people and planet related to climate, water, diversity, social, all things. And we're really focusing in now on decarbonizing the supply chain of the fashion industry. So I'll tell you more about that later, but that's me. And then prior to this, I ran the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute, which was the third-party standard that was focused on circular economy. But bigger than that, it really looked at 5 key pillars of the way we make and design products. And as you mentioned, across all product sectors, I got started in the built environment with products going to buildings, but we did personal care, we did packaging, and fashion as well. And those 5 pillars, which I think are really a great framework for the issues to identify, are, the material itself, and is it healthy and safe for all systems? Can it go back into itself for biological systems or technical systems? And then how it's made in terms of renewable energy, clean water stewardship, and social fairness. And to me, that framework really kind of helps set a lot of the work that I've done, and what sort of drew me to that whole philosophy to begin with. And a lot of what we're doing today is really creating those roadmaps to help suppliers to achieve that kind of future vision. So with that, your question was about the utopia, like what would I like to see? So, yeah, what would I prescribe? So it's interesting because as I said earlier when we were talking back over here in our green room tent, there's no real right or wrong answer here because there's so much to do, right? There's so much to do in this industry. To me, there's a production problem and there's a consumption problem, and we have to address both sides of it. And I think oftentimes in organizations we're focused on one side of the equation or the other. When I was at Cradle to Cradle, I was doing a lot more around circularity and engagement with consumer and ensuring that materials got back, and what is that post-consumer relationship to circular economy, shared economy, Now at the Apparel Impact Institute, I'm really working on cleaning up the way we make clothes. But the real solution is to address the volume of what we're creating, the business models that are around how we create and relate to products and materials and services in this sector, in this industry. And then on the other side, that when we are making a brand new product, that we're ensuring that it is using the most regenerative systems of materials, of water, energy, and human livelihood. I mean, that to me is the vision for the future. And then you can break that down, and the rest of this intelligent panel can answer more on that or other things.
And I'm just mindful that I got so overexcited talking about fashion and its villains that I didn't actually let the rest of our panelists introduce themselves. So before we go on to the deeper questions, Samantha, just quickly tell us who you are and what you've done before this and what you're doing. Philippe and Ava as well, please, if that's all right.
Sure. And I love the villains thing, by the way. So my name's Samantha Pattinson. I am the CEO of an organisation that was formerly called Red Carpet Green Dress. And we recently rebranded to RCGD Global, although we still have Red Carpet Green Dress under our umbrella. And we started as essentially a sustainable design competition founded by Susie and James Cameron the year they had Avatar. And they knew they were going to the Oscars, they knew they would be asked, what are you wearing? And they wanted to kind of facilitate a more meaningful conversation on the red carpet and talk about fashion's impact on people and planet. So we've grown to include internships, work experiences, educational programs across academic institutions around the world. We have a material innovation department now. We do brand consultancy work, and we also have a thought leadership reports and intelligence to really try and essentially demystify sustainability and make sure that it's culturally representative. That's kind of, those are two things that mean a great deal to us. So thank you for having me.
Great. Philippe, just tell us quickly about yourself.
My name is Philippe Homsey. I've been a villain for 6 years. So it's an interesting story that we were 4 guys who got into the fashion business with 0 experience. Just had became one of the fastest growing brands in Europe. We had 66, we were in 66 countries in all the best stores. We built 32 stores, from Ginza to South Korea to China, one in Covent Garden. And the better the business did, I think the worse we did from a moral conscious point of view. As we started to really see, what it was like to work with factories in China, and it was all about margin, and it was about volumes, and when you ask the questions about sustainability, it was just kind of brushed aside. So I think after us, it was what we wanted our legacy to be. So long story short, we tore it all down, and we built a brand called Loki, and we've been doing that for uniting style and purpose, and just really enjoying the journey we're on.
And it's mainly footwear, isn't it?
It's all footwear at the moment, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's Loki, L-O-C-I. And Ava, tell us about you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Put all of the innovation and material science behind.
Thank you very much. And I guess, and Eva, on that point as well, before Pangaea, you ran the global fashion agenda, which was responsible for really driving a lot of change and trying to make fashion cleaner, greener, and better. And to the same point that I said to Lewis, if you had a magic wand, if you were resources, whatever, what would you do? What would you prescribe to clean up the fashion industry?
I would get rid of fast fashion.
Okay.
And I think it's actually a little bit saying the same, but in a different way that Lewis is pointing towards. The volumes is the biggest problem.
Okay.
It's the way it's produced. Obviously, it's both how we source the natural resources, what we do with them, the amount of chemical and energy and everything that goes into it, and into our world. It's exploitation of human labor, and the one triggers it to an accelerated point is the fast fashion industry. And the growth trajectory is more than double. But in 2019, when we looked at the numbers, we were going on a growth trajectory that said that we would grow 81% in volume.
81.
And of course, I appreciate that it's not every wallet that can pay for expensive products, but then buy vintage or buy a little less. And I know that concept of buying less and looking at value creation rather than volume creation is a very difficult concept for an industry that is, or for a world that is built around growth. We all believe we need to grow and grow and grow to be better and bigger and stronger and more. But we need to simply reverse that conversation. So that's a whole GDP conversation as well, because it's how our societies are built for a growth model. But what we're experiencing right now when we're in a financial crisis is that everybody's looking short-term incentives. How do I get, the best margins up against the next quarter and all of that? And I think we're in a vicious cycle on that. And I think we simply need, and that's where we need policies. We need to
Yeah.
call on policies
We
to help
do.
us legislate. How cheap can a product be?
Yeah.
When can there be like a minimum
Yeah.
price for a product?
Yeah.
Or even fuel industry where you can make a good business by overproducing and marking down your product. And it might even be a product that was cheap already.
Yeah, exactly.
And
why
so it
don't we-
makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think a question for both you and Philip in a way, because you're both attached to product now, both of you. And for those people watching, let's just take a basic cotton t-shirt. Okay. Cotton t-shirts, a farmer somewhere has got to grow that cotton, right? Then he's probably got to buy some products, hopefully not too many pesticides, and that's going to cost him some money. He's got to buy the seeds first, and then he's got to plant them, and then spend his time, which is money, and then buy these pesticides or anything else he needs to treat his cotton. He's got to tend to his cotton, grow it as a crop. Then someone's going to then take it, and it's got to be spun, harvested, cultivated, then taken somewhere else to be woven into a material, then taken somewhere else to be dyed, and somewhere else to be maybe printed on and cut and stitched, and then it's taken to a facility, to a warehouse, and then it's going to be distributed, and then it's got to get to the point of sale, and then it gets to the customer. How is it possible with all of those processes and materials that a t-shirt can cost the same amount as a takeaway cup of coffee? It just doesn't make sense. So who is paying the price? Not the customer. The people on the planet are paying the price of that. So I think the question that I'm sure lots of people watching this have, who may be on a restricted budget, would say, well, what more do I get? If I spend £5 at Primark or Shein on a t-shirt, instead I wait and I save up, or I use Klarna, or I use another facility in order to save up and spend $40, $50 or on that, or I spend, let's say, how much is a pair of Loki sneakers, Philip?
$180.
Okay, so if they're like, what do they get for that extra money? What are they getting? Well, what good karma are they getting? Question for you, Philip, and then Ava, I'd love to hear what they're getting from Pangaea as opposed to that Shein purchase.
I think that the future of brands is what they stand for. It goes back to the days of Nike about building that community. And I think brands with purpose are, as Larry Flink said, are the next brands, the next unicorns. So I think with Loki, we're set up to try and use this kind of material. So all the sneakers are made from recycled ocean plastic, and we give 10% of our online profits to wildlife conservation charities. And we're ultimately trying to turn that tide on wildlife destruction, because it's something so close to all of us. So I think you're investing in a brand because they have a purpose. Like one of my favorite brands is Patagonia, and just the pushback they're doing on the government, and just leading that charge for all of us, knowing that we can all have clean breathing air, because Patagonia are there to say no when one of the administrations comes in with a policy to get rid of Greenland. So I think people are what we are looking for is creating brands that mean something, so people can get behind them and also support them where they can with the purchase, but knowing that they will be there to be at the front line.
Okay, so every step they take in a pair of Lokis, they can every single step think that's a step towards something better, rather than that $40 pair of sneakers, right? Like, I guess it's like to know that that's what you're spending your money on, right?
Yeah, and I think it's about longevity, about creating great products that will have that longevity, that they won't be destroyed after a few days usage, right? It's about a good product which can last for years, and it's timeless, so it's not depending on seasons.
Okay.
But ultimately for us it's all about purpose. It has to be woven into the DNA.
And Ava, okay, hold that. We're going to come straight back to you. And Ava, tell me, if I have that choice again, my £5 t-shirt from Shein or however much it is from Pangaea, what am I getting if I save up and acquire that item from Pangaea? What is in my hands that's so much better that I maybe can't see, because it may look to those who aren't really used to examining fashion that closely? What if they can't see the difference? For example, what are they getting that's like woven into those seams or into those fibers that they can't see?
Yeah, I mean, a t-shirt at Pangaea could be $65 or $75, so I know it's not for every wallet. Hopefully you get better quality, and you particularly you buy into some values, and you support an ecosystem and a supply chain and a value chain that is different. Yeah. And I think we have to think about our purchasing as a way of voting. It's our way of telling directions into society, and that's a luxury, of course, that some have more of and some less. And I think it's really important that it doesn't come across as arrogant when you say don't buy fast fashion, because I think the one point that I don't like about the fast fashion is that it's fueling overconsumption. So it gives us an opportunity to buy way more than we need. Because if you just need one T-shirt, then buy one T-shirt or whatever price point, and then keep it longer. Because I mean, actually, the most sustainable product that you can get is the one you already have.
Yeah.
So, and I know that is a scary concept for an industry that is, again, back to the, growth pursuit. And that's why we need to look into the more, new business models of repurposing products. Can we resell it and use it again? Or what can we do with it? What can we do with the fibers instead of dumping them
like Lewis
in
said,
Africa?
they just become
and
themselves again.
polluting
And
the environment and, disrupting their whole possibility of, Ghana is a place where they receive,
Cantamanto market.
Tons and tons. Like
anyone out there watching this, Google Cantamanto market fashion. You'll see these toxic
insane
piles of just really.
So we need to get all of
filthy-
that product back into the loop so it can be repurposed,
Quite right.
remade, and made. The
And that's
fibers
what
are
they
worth
get,
something. And I think it's the
Pangai.
wastefulness of fashion that is the biggest problem we have, and that the price makes it more wasteful, right? So if you don't pay so much, you're also maybe a little less.
You don't think of
sort
it as valuable, right?
Whereas if you pay it more, you keep it longer, you maybe repair, So it's a little bit back to the roots, and we're becoming more and more people on the planet. So everybody's going to grow anyway.
Yeah.
We don't need to
Lewis,
sell
I
them
know-
3 T-shirts instead of 1.
Thank you. I know you said you had something.
Well, my devil's advocate, I think you were kind of hitting on it, which is we do have to remember that most people on the planet cannot afford to buy a lot of the products that are built in a sustainable way or that we're going to care for longer because we spent more money on them. A lot of people really are, most people on the planet are really, struggling around how they can afford food and shelter and clothing. And so as we continue to have climate crisis and issues around environmental refugees and climate justice issues, we're going to have more and more people that are really pressed around that way. So there is a role for lower price point clothing. But to your point, and I totally agree, if it's an economics game and if you treat whatever you buy with the same level of value, and I'm certainly not a perfect purchase spender and consumer as much as I work in the space, I'd like to think that I am, but I know that I have products that I bought at these fast fashion companies that I've had for 15, 20 years, and I hold on to them. Now, maybe I'm in the anomaly, because, if you spend less, you tend to not care for it as much. But I think if we can also do a both and with what we're sort of all saying, which is if you are going to shop and buy, something that you do still continue to treat in a way that goes back into the system.
Quality is good enough.
And I think then what happens is less purchasing, which means those companies will have to raise price points, which means they can actually potentially put some of that margin back into better product. And so then you will always have the lower ones come back in underneath because there will always be the demand for the lower price point. So, it's a vicious cycle as long as consumption remains. But I think there's an interesting economics game to that. I don't know. But I'd like to hear from Samad.
Yes, I tell you what, I might get you to pass the mic down a bit. I'll hold one.
Okay, you hold one.
You guys share that. Okay, yeah, we'll all share. Fashion could become the Sharon economy. We're going to start with microphones and show you how it's done. Now, Samata, the question I had for you is that in this idea of this excess consumption that Ava and Lewis have just expanded on, one of the issues I identified in a white paper I wrote recently was, how if we're going to have to try and make change, what do you do when you get to the problem of influencers, right? Because if you go on social media now, you see these things called hauls and drops. Now, when I went into fashion, it was called a collection, which is kind of quite an elegant way of summarizing something that somebody spent months designing and thinking and ideating. But now it's called a haul and a drop, which makes it sound so devalued for a start, right? Yeah. And influencers, they have every right to make a living and they have a bottom line, but a lot of that comes from paid partnerships with fashion brands. Yeah. And that, in turn, emulates the same celebrities that you see a lot of in your work, and I've seen a lot of styling some of these A-listers. And Philippe knows about that because, by the way, he got invested in by Leonardo DiCaprio. We're going to give him a round of applause for that later. But, I think a lot of it is that a lot of young people out there, the TikTokers, they want to emulate this idea of fame and celebrity. So they will then follow the influencers who then encourage them, okay, go and buy a haul, buy a drop, and get a new outfit for every appearance, which is like their kind of pop-up on the red carpet or the press junket. So what would you say to influencers who are tempted to promote that, or those who follow influencers thinking, I'll just run to Shane or Primark or even somewhere up, in the middle of the market, but they just want to, what would you say to them?
I struggle with this kind of concept of influencers only influencing in one direction, because I think the concept of influence can be exerted in many different ways. Now, you do have influencers who are promoting essentially the fast fashion model, which is to consume, wear it once, throw it away. And obviously, categorically, I don't agree with that. I think there's a missed opportunity with influencers to kind of show them many different ways you can participate in fashion that don't require you to always purchase something new. And we did this incredible academy with Zalando recently, where we talked to influencers about educating their kind of watchers about everything from from vintage and secondhand to DIY to creating to learning how to make to re-wearing things they already own and styling that in numerous different ways. And we tried to show them that the fashion model has to move away from purely pushing products to like almost a product and services market where it's training people, it's giving them new skills, it's showing them and empowering them to use their own creativity. And I think my biggest issue with the influencer and TikTok culture is I think it underestimates people's ability to be creative. And for me, fashion is supposed to be an exploration of creativity. It's supposed to be kind of standing out. It's finding your own things, it's customizing your own things, it's making your own unique stand. And I think under the tsunami of kind of push, sell, we've just kind of devalued that, and we've devalued what's being made. I also think there's a missed opportunity when it comes to just educating people about the history of fashion. When people talk about vintage, for example, I think we talk about vintage and the fact that we're wearing something that exists and's been there and extending the use of that garment, but we don't talk about fashion history. We don't take vintage as an opportunity to educate people about how things used to be made. So there are all of these missed opportunities to just add intellectualism, to add depth, to add meaning to what clothing actually means and represents. So it's tricky because part of our work is with a form of influencer, which is talent. We work with talent for the Oscars, for example. We worked with Billie Eilish most recently this Oscars. But what we try and do with them is say, what is a passion or what is a subject that means something to you? Like for Billie, her thing was climate. With Emma Roberts, it was secondhand and pre-loved. With Tati Gabrielle, it was the making craft. It was discovering herself to be a maker. And so we try and say, let's focus on that and communicate that out to the people that watch you and inspire them to follow suit with that, instead of saying, like, we're here to get people to buy stuff. So I think there's just a different conversation we're trying to have with influencers and talent. And I think we're all influencers, to be 100% honest with you. It's just what we're choosing to use our platforms for. That's the big distinct difference.
Well said. That's brilliant.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you very, very, very much. So if that's what you would say to them, Lewis, you deal with CEOs and you deal with really high-level people in the work you do. What would you say to all the CEOs and the other really senior decision makers you meet out there, investors, the money people, the private equity, the VCs who are powering some of the fashion brands? What would you say to them, to try and get them to think about this differently?
Well, I think the ones that I talk to or know are part of the reality of the direction that it's headed. I really do. I'm also an optimist, so you can pick apart everything I say and be like, oh, that guy's just an optimist. But I really do feel if you are a CEO of a fashion brand today and you're not thinking about the direction of where your company needs to be in 10, 15, 20 years and aligned to the SDGs and aligned to the future of humanity on the planet, then you're kind of missing the boat. And one of the things that I've thought about for years is this sort of metaphor that you hear sometimes about like flying to Mars and setting up a new colony. And to me, it's like, here we are very close to the Holy Land, Mount Sinai and all that. I think about Noah's Ark, and I think about like, we're really facing another one of those. Whether you're spiritual or religious or not, this is what climate crisis is. We're going to lose a large part of human population. We're going to lose a large part of the planet where we can live. And so this is a time where if you're going to survive as an individual, as a society, a culture, a country, or a brand, you better be part of the solution, which means you better design yourself to be that your business is part of the solution, or else you've missed it. And I think whatever that means to you as a CEO or you're a leader and you have a stake in this, it's a tremendous amount of power and it's a tremendous amount of opportunity to change markets. But it also takes courage and it's bold, and you can get tossed out if you do it wrong. But I think this is the time to be bold and courageous and be willing to get fired for actually aligning yourself to the right direction. And that's going to mean really looking seriously at the way we've created capitalism. And that's a big part of it, and the production consumption model and what it means to be profitable. I'll say one last thing on it, which is when I go back and think when we civilized ourselves and we stopped hunting and gathering and we colonized ourselves, we kind of different people formed different products and services. I was the guy that did the cheese. She had the milk. We had a barter system. She made the shoes. I got the leather, And so it was about pride. You did something. You had a value. You were known for that. Your last name became that. Your family was known for that. And we've lost all that. We don't really care what the product and service is as long as you're returning shareholder value. It really doesn't matter what you make or do. There's no value, you know. And so I think this is the time in society and humanity where you just absolutely have to revert to pride in why you're here. Are you on the ark? Or are you going to be in the flood?
Oh, well said. Samantha, I know you had something to say about that.
Yeah,
Tell
and
us.
it's actually tying to what Lewis just said and that earlier concept of a utopia, which I just wanted to connect. And my utopia, which actually links to what Lewis just said, involves a complete decentering of this conversation, because I think we've also fooled ourselves into thinking that we are reinventing the wheel. And I think what happens when you travel across cultures and you travel across continents is you recognize that we aren't reinventing the wheel, and that there are ecosystems and cultures that have thrived and demonstrated these principles and actually tried to hold fast and steadfast to them in the face of a system that they feel is almost foreign to what they agree with. I remember having a really great conversation with a collective of, actually it was a multi-generational family, like a kind of grandma, great-grandmother, daughter, granddaughter, Bangladeshi family, and in the same room I had some cousins from Ghana, and I remember the conversations there were, this is not new to us, and in fact where this kind of business model is going is something we've always pushed against in our culture. We took great pride in loving the things we have. We took great pride in looking after the things we have. My daughter has something that my great-grandmother gave her. There was this idea of circularity is not new. And I think if we can just, my utopia is just recognizing that and allowing ourselves to immerse ourselves in those cultures again and learn from them and respect and recognize that we're returning to how we were. We're not going on this new adventure. And I know that fashion likes to pride itself on something new all the time. But in doing that, we're doing ourselves a disservice because we're searching for something that's already there. So I love what Lewis said about this kind of return to almost looking back to how we used to hunt and gather, how we used to approach things. And I think that's like so critical right now, because we have continents and thought leaders we need to be listening to for our solutions. And they aren't all in the global north. In fact, a lot of them are in the global south.
Yes.
And that last bit on my utopia is that distribution of wealth in the value cycle. I would love for when a brand does incredibly well, the raw material, the garment manufacturers do incredibly well too. It never reaches back. It never reaches up to that kind of beginning source. It only gathers and accumulates at that end. And I think a utopia is where there's an equity to profit. There's an equity to growth. That isn't kind of doesn't erase the core contributors.
Unlike who recently got outed on Channel 4 for paying 3 cents per garment to their workers. I mean, unbelievable. I think to your point about it's almost like, you know, look at something. We had some Indigenous leaders up here at this amazing space earlier, and you look at how their communities have thrived for thousands of years by taking, you know, things. If there's any waste, they use them. And I think that takes me on to you, Philippe, which is to think about, you know, how is it that your product takes ocean waste, right? And then, and what would otherwise just become pollution and ruin the seas and the ecosystems out there in under the waves. So how does that work? So in it kind of, because to me it sort of slightly replicates how, if you ask an Indigenous leader, how would you design your sneakers? They'd probably do something a bit like that. Be like, well, we've got all these things lying around, so we'll make that into something, right? Is that kind of?
Yeah, well, actually, you know, only 9% of all plastic is actually recycled. Specifically, if you look at PET bottles, you know, in the US, it's only 29%. So there's this huge opportunity of you know, feedstock that is, you know, going into the oceans or into landfills. And I think, you know, there's so many brands now which are so inspiring to see at COP who are saying, hey, there's a second life for this material. And obviously it's not perfect, it's not a cradle to grave solution, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. I think that's what, you know, I'm inspired to say, okay, how can we make sure that, you know, we're taking this waste, we're giving it an opportunity to become a product, and then we're giving back. I think to Samada's point, you know, I've been to a lot of factories in China, and it was one of the things that always stuck with me is that, you know, the better you did, the better the factory boss did, and it never trickled down. And now with this local production, you know, in Europe, you know, you see as you grow, like these towns in Portugal starting to grow as well, and community thriving, and it's, you know, of course, in a way, it's been a good thing that China's become a little more isolationist, so that companies are now coming back to Europe and paying more for their product because it is having an effect on the community, and people are seeing it. I think back to, honestly, on the utopian kind of conversation there, to go a bit far right field, you know, what's been really interesting to see with our community is a desire to go online. You know, that metaverse world is used so much, but, you know, when you actually look at it, especially in these developing countries, they are expressing their creativity there online. And if you look at brands like Balenciaga and Fortnite, you know, they recently announced that last year they did 2 billion in sales just on Fortnite, selling skins. So there's such a demand for this product, and there's no waste for it. So it's, you know, it's a win-win. You can express your creativity, and I think we've been super cautious about that now. But now we've jumped in 2 feet. We've just done our first collaboration with Aglet and Metaverse. You know, it's a #1 downloaded app in Ukraine at the moment.
Wow.
So during the war, this country is still making sure to go and express themselves on the Metaverse. And it's just amazing now that as brands, you can go there and engage with consumer. You can have a positive message. You don't have to make product. You can still generate a revenue which provides purpose. And it's just really exciting to see what's happening there with this younger consumer, where, you know, they're more conscious, but they still want to be an individual.
So I guess it's going back to Samantha's point a bit, like there's nothing wrong with self-expression, right? But so maybe the metaverse will allow people to express themselves without ever actually having raw materials involved. Or slave labor or something.
I think the more, even, you know, being in my 30s, the more you enjoy, even, you know, being in metaverse. It always seems like it was for the younger generation, but you start to, it's quite addictive, and it's quite interesting to play, and you know, we all grew up in, you know, with SimCity and all the rest of it. But yeah, I think I really am positive about that future of less, you know, consummation and more just online and expressing individuality. So anyway, we'll see where that goes, but we're definitely positive about it.
Well, I guess in that respect, we're kind of, you know, we have to look back to go forward, and I think that leads me on to a question for Ava, which is, you know, ideally fashion would go back, right? Go back to how the indigenous peoples, they dress themselves, go back to the same model that you talked about, Lewis, but unfortunately, we've now hit the 21st century. We've got used to certain things, so we kind of have to go back to go forward. So I guess, Ava, the question for you is, like, how is it that I get the sense that at Pangaea what they're doing is kind of replicating some of those ways, right? The way that Mother Nature operates herself by being incredibly innovative and not wasting things. But do you think that if other brands embrace the kind of science and innovation and technology that you see at Pangaea, do you think that would, you know, if that was adopted more across the mainstream of fashion globally, would that make it a lot cleaner and greener, the industry?
No, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the life cycle of a product, the biggest environmental impact sits in the production, and it's the sourcing of the raw materials and the treatment of the materials and so on. So I think that is really environmentally a big, you know, a big area to look at. And I mean, even for recycling, it's super, super complicated, because ocean waste is waste, and it's super polluted, and it needs to get out of the oceans. But we also see supply chains that are, you know, fully in their own circle with plastic bottles that should stay plastic bottles. They should not become a dress. They should stay there, and we shouldn't take them out and then turn them into
because
something
it takes a lot of other chemicals to go from being a plastic bottle to being a dress.
At the end of the day, even, I mean, and we also have recycled nylon in our collection until we have a better replacement, which is coming, which will be, you know, bio-based and biodegradable, but that to come. But yeah, so, and I think it's just really important where you source those. But I mean, recycled nylon or polyester still remains polyester. And it shreds microfibers and so on. But yes, absolutely. I think material innovation is a big step and an important step for the industry. And even if we look like we're mostly a brand, we're actually also a B2B platform.
Yes.
And like many others, you know, supplying the industry with access to our IPs and, you know, happy to help and have more companies unlock that journey.
Okay.
By joining forces. But one other thing that I wanted to mention, because of course, Pangaea is a lot about science and innovation, and it's more tech, and we talk metaverse, which I think is a big opportunity for the influencers who want to change clothes every day for a photo.
They could just do a digital
they
clothing,
could just do
right?
a digital one. But fashion is also a lot to do with agriculture and nature. And we sometimes miss, I think, that a little bit, because it doesn't look so much like it has so much to do with nature, right? But we source so many natural resources.
Yeah.
And that whole area is sort of missed also here at COP in this bigger climate conversation, I think. The potential that nature sits on, all of the solution that it holds, if we manage and restore and protect it in a different way. And that goes all the way back to the field.
Yeah, like, I mean, Egypt is famous for its cotton. We're sitting in, everyone has probably seen Bedlin and other things marketed as Egyptian cotton is great, but a lot of people aren't aware, are they, either that, you know, in certain places like India, there are farmers who end up killing themselves. It's a well-known thing, these suicides across India, because farmers get pressurized by companies like Monsanto to buy their seeds at a very, very elevated prices, and then to deliver certain quantities. And when they can't, the sense of honor that's gone, you know, they're not able to feed their families, they end up killing themselves. So if anyone out there is thinking about buying a cotton t-shirt or anything cotton, do you want to be wearing something that's maybe part of an ecosystem that encourages suicide? I mean, It's nuts, right?
It's completely nuts. And I mean, 60% of the world's textile fashion is dominated by the fossil fuel based.
Yeah.
But around 30% comes from cotton, and only 1%, less than 1%, is organic.
Which is insane.
So we're still at a stage where there's so much conventional cotton produced, and the monocropping, which is also resembled in all other food and agriculture, it is really bad for the soil. You know, and the tilling of the soil, the pesticides used is killing natural habitat and biodiversity. And yeah, I mean, it might not feel like it's very fashion to talk about soil and
but it's
nature,
so important.
but we have to.
Yeah.
And we have to be mindful about how we source those natural resources as well. And the shift right now, the big buzzword is regenerative. It's being exploited already.
Yeah,
I met somebody who did regenerative travel. I don't know what that is. It's used everywhere and misleading. So we definitely need to put up the right guardrails or parameters for what regenerative cotton or other products means. But it's on both on practice and outcome base. But it's such an important journey, and we need to kickstart it to unlock nature's potential to be this carbon sink and help us solve a lot of the issues that we're facing.
I think that takes me on. I was going to ask you, Lewis, actually, yes. No, you go ahead, go right ahead.
Well, while we're on the Utopia topic, local systems. I mean, we're also talking about like creating value and wealth. I mean, what we do when we send our clothes to Africa to disrupt the artistry, the production, you know, small batches, local batches. I mean, and this is a large part of it. One of the things when I flew here on an airplane, emitting a lot of carbon, Delta had the little bags that had your toiletry kit in there with a QR code of the person who hand-stitched it. It was an artisan in Mexico. And I looked at it, and I went and I looked at it, and I've seen other things do this, but I'm like, this is the return we need. And, you know, I'm sure there's faulty issues with that product. But, you know, in a lot of ways, I think they're onto something, which is really around this relationship building that we're talking about with local systems, which we're going to have to get to eventually as we're disrupting these fragile supply chains and start building those resilient systems now. So,
thank you. And Samantha, on that note, could you, I mean, I think to this point of like going back and doing things locally as Lewis has described, like, could you tell us like a little bit about that in Ghana, like what it might have been 50, 100 years ago, and now what has happened there with Kantamanto Market? Because I'm sure a lot of people, I often tell people, do you know what goes on in Kantamanto Market? And they don't. Tell us a bit about that, because it's kind of a metaphor for what's wrong with fashion generally, if you look at Ghana, right? Like ancient clothing, technique, craft, materials, and then now that it's just swamped with
it's so interesting. So we had like a thriving textile industry, and we had fabric made that was kind of made from kind of bark, tree bark, kind of really resilient, tough fabric, actually, kind of fabric worn by chiefs and stamped with natural dyes with really powerful symbols called adinkra symbols. And it was kind of our pride, and people associate often kente cloth with West Africa, but kente cloth and those kind of really bright kind of bright prints are really kind of originated, they're Dutch in origin. We had our own kind of really powerful indigenous textiles. And what essentially happened was, I guess, an infiltration of the market, and so kind of domestic production of textiles and our own kind of textile ranges were essentially kind of forced out by cheaper, kind of poorer quality alternatives, predominantly from Asia. I mean, China is one of the biggest suppliers of like competitive textiles for Ghana's domestic textile industry. So what you have is a loss of trade for kind of Ghanaian people, and then you have also the issue of the younger generation who are almost becoming more familiar and acquainted with these newer, cheaper textile options and just a new way of designing. And I think what we don't talk about sometimes is like the almost threat of loss of culture, because that's what it is. It's the same thing you hear with families where maybe the father or the great-grandfather were fishermen, and it just doesn't become a viable career solution for the next generation. And so that's what's happening. You kind of don't have that viable career option because it's been becoming obsolete. But what's happened with Ghana is essentially a lot of the time people think that when they're donating clothing to charity shops that it's like a goodwill gesture, and you know, it's going on to a good home, somebody that really needs it, someone who can't clothe themselves. But you know, ultimately that's not quite the case. We're buying so many clothes that, you know, I think it's Oxfam released a figure that 70% of the clothes that get donated to Oxfam just get sent over to the continent of Africa and to predominantly to West Africa. And they're kind of forced to accept these. There was a condition where a few countries gathered together and said, we don't want to accept any more waste. And they were basically threatened with trade deal expulsion. So they were basically told, if you don't accept these secondhand clothes, you will be frozen out of lucrative trade deals for your country. So they had to accept it. And so we're just inundated. There are markets where it's just stacked to almost block out the sun with clothing. It's in Labadi Beach, it's in our waters, it's just clogging up our water, it's clogging up our landfills, it's clogging up our earth. And it's a really tragic situation. And actually the Ghanaian community, there's a saying, it's like dead man's clothes, dead white man's clothes, because they don't understand. They think someone must have died for so much to be sent over, like somebody must have no need for these. So it just shows you that there's just this polarity of how we see things, this idea of being doing a goodwill gesture versus the reality. And Lewis alluded to it as well. What it also does is it suppresses local talent because they're competing with something that they can't compete with. And I actually wanted to say my Utopia also just allows certain words to be used and applied to different people, because I find it hard to accept that the word couture is so easily applied to Parisian work, but it's so difficult to apply to like a Ghanaian or a Nigerian designer. And that is because we have a perception of who's allowed to use these words. And it's the same way that these local designers are not allowed to thrive. They're not allowed to compete with New York, London, Milan, Paris. And that's what we're doing. We're kind of burying them with clothes, and we're also suppressing their ability to create. And I know it feels quite doom and gloom, but it can just be redirected. Like with the Red Carpet campaign, we're so trying to encourage talent to even wear designers from different countries. Like stop falling back on the same brands. Like go further out. Wear an Indonesian designer, wear a Ghanaian designer, wear a Japanese designer.
Where would they find them? Where
Just literally just
go
do
online?
research. Like there's Africa Fashion Week, there's the ethical, like there are so many clusters of collectives that showcase designers. You literally just have to look. And I think that's another utopia for me. I mean, just to reshift and create space for these other domestic industries to really thrive and show their creativity as well. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I think we're nearly at time. So I thought what we might just do is, for those who are watching here in the room and digitally online and live stream, it'd be good to, as all of these experts here, I mean, you've mentioned some of the terminology, and I think that's also one of the issues, and I think a lot of people don't understand because greenwashing is so rife, and it's only just recently in the UK where they've brought out some legislation against it. But could you all just talk about, like, what does, say, something like circularity or organic and all these terms mean to you, and how could we educate those watching and wider audiences? It's like how to basically smell bullshit, right? Because like circularity to me is when a product or system or process copies Mother Nature, right? Like, and circularity is not possible with the kind of clothing that gets dumped in Ghana and Cantonmento market, because you can't pull out the stretch from the jeans and take the zips or the buttons off that easily, so you can't recycle that cheap clothing into something else, can you? So, like, Lewis, why don't I start with you? Because you know, obviously with Cradle to Cradle, and you've worked across so many sectors, what would be a few things you would say, like, these are the terms to look for, this is what they should mean or what they don't mean?
Well, okay. You know, I think it's an interesting question, and I mean, again, we could take the whole panel on this, but I really like where you were with some of these words which started off as sort of pure, authentic words, really have been taken by the marketing teams. Regenerative is a great one. When that word had kind of emerged on the scene a few years back, I was like, that's it, it's regenerative. And then I was like really excited about the definition of that word, and now you're seeing it applied to, like, you know, air travel or what. And so I think that, you know, any word is subject to having its fault. It's hard to sort of break down which ones are right, which ones are good, you know, when you think about it. And it's also how that word plays out with an individual company or a brand. You know, it's different to everyone. I mean, having worked in the circular economy space, circularity was used widely about a lot of things. And where I really like, and I said this at the beginning, I really think of it, and it's the same of those pure words like regenerative, around like restorative systems, where it is that concept of we're putting back into it what we take out of it, which is an indigenous wisdom too, around like leave what you take, pray for what you take, ask for what you take, return what you take, and that you have this relationship that, and I'm doing my hand like this, as circular, because to me it is that. And I think if we are thinking about all of our exchanges and interactions is like, you know, the law of attraction, or like what you put out, you're going to get back, right? And it's like an equal force or whatever the, you know. Anyway, you know where I'm going. So I'm a little tired. But anyway, that to me is like, you know, any word can be used for good or bad, but it's really as you start to understand how they're using that word and try to understand what's behind it, you know, really. It's hard because, I mean, marketing is, in this industry, is really sophisticated in a lot of ways to trick you. Yeah.
Actually, on that, just quickly, I think I love the work that was done recently with, I think it's a Citizens Consumer Watchdog, and I can't remember the name of the exact organization, but it was essentially a call out to kind of combat greenwashing through
CMA.
Labeling, the CMA, thank you. But what I found fascinating about this push to brands to be very specific about what you mean. You know, I have a rambunctious 4-year-old, and I have parents talking to me about what I do, and a mum came up to me, she's like, I'm really happy I got these organic cotton, like these organic leggings, these organic cotton leggings. And I was like, okay. And she says, I feel really good about this. And I'm really into this whole safe fashion thing right now. You know, I'm feeling very passionate about people being aware that the clothes that we wear affect our bodies, our biospheres, the dyes and so on. And I had to explain to her that, you know, the cotton is organic, but the dyes are not certified. So I think, you know, for her to understand that there's a process, like you've got the organic cotton, but the actual colouring process of those leggings is a separate thing. That's a non-certified synthetic dyes to get you that bright yellow with the green dots. You know, so I think this, you know, being really specific is important these days about exactly what you're referring to. And I think that is something to look out for. And what was beautiful about the CMA is that it was citizen-led. It was citizens approaching and saying, we're really confused about the language. Can you give us tools? And that just shows you where people are at right now. They do want to understand, but they want to know what exactly you're saying to them.
Yeah, it's like another one would be like, say, vegan leather. I don't know if everyone's ever been attracted to
rubber
vegan leather. Like the other day, actually, Samantha and I were both interviewed for the same article in the Hollywood Reporter, and they said to me, let's talk about sustainable fashion on the red carpet. And I said, I'll give you a good one I read about the other day from my own alma mater, Vogue, where I've worked for 11 Vogues. And in Vogue recently, they wrote about a plant-based dress that Leia Seydoux wore, made by Louis Vuitton. I was like, oh, it's plant-based, is it? Okay, so it's as opposed to being made of meat.
That was our dress. That's nuts that they called it a plant-based dress.
And I was like, like, and it's the same as vegan. It's like vegan leather. Like, quite often that's made of fossil fuels, unless it's like, say, a grape leather like yours, right? So like, that's a really big one.
But that also has 26% PU in it,
which is plastic.
Which is plastic. It's water-based, but you know, you need to be transparent about it all. And I think that's, you know, it's a good thing that we're having legislation come in many countries that are going to demand that brands are more transparent.
Yes.
I'm worried sometimes whether the consumer actually really want to know all of that, or if have time or bandwidth. So that's why marketing teams have been good at sort of keeping it short or catchy,
simple,
or you know, making it easier to sort of digest. But the disclosure, the transparency is key. And people do need to go a layer below and actually understand a little bit more that it's not just the cotton, it's also the dyes, or it's also, other steps of the road. And I hope consumers are with us. I hope they're interested enough. I
Stay on the journey.
We've applied something called Eon. It's a digital passport in our clothes, so people can scan it. I don't have the data of how many actually do that, but I think let the information be available.
Quick
be super
scan
transparent
of a QR code,
and actually break down what it is that you have in your products and be honest. And I think especially with taking those terms like, you know, calling something made of plastic vegan is crap. And you know, it ruins all of the really genuine work that some others are doing in this space. But be transparent about what it is and what it isn't. And nobody's perfect, and there isn't 100% route to any of it yet. But I think we're all on a journey, right? And hopefully consumers will join along. And I think maybe in my little utopian world, people would not be called consumers. I think we're citizens first and foremost, because we're not just here to consume. But secondly, we would believe fully that all we do have an impact. And I sometimes think that we feel powerless because of global problems being hammered at us, and we think, okay, they're going to solve it at COP. The politicians are going to meet, and they're probably going to do it. I'm going to continue to do what I do. But actually believe that each and every one of us have an impact. What we do, what we say, what we spend our money on.
Collective action.
Collective actions, but also just individual actions. Because I think sometimes the connectivity is what leaves us a little bit paralyzed. Like, does it even matter that I sort my garbage at home? Where does it go? Who takes care of it? And I don't even trust whether it goes. Or and then if you don't feel connected, and you don't see yourself plug into that bigger system, you go, oh, who cares, you know. I just go to Shein and buy something crap or H&M or whatever. So, yeah.
Brilliant, well said. And anything
Sorry,
else?
Mary,
No, please, let's close.
So I think, you know, from the little guy in the room, right? Like 18 months old, it's super complicated. You know, I think
your brand, you mean?
No, just in terms of the whole industry.
Yeah.
You know, we're trying to look at the best material to use, and people send you swatches, and you know, you spend hours analyzing it. So I don't. It's, you know, I think there's a lot of people who want to do good. But it's just a really complicated industry out there. And I think if we can complement someone like Pangaea, who you know, I think is such an amazing company in the way they share all the work that they're doing with brands out there, you know, like Volvo giving the patent away for its seatbelts. You know, I think that's what the industry needs. It needs more brands who are willing to open up their books and say, hey, we're experts in this, let us help you. And I think the brands like
Allbirds, Ganni do that.
Yeah, we want to use the right material, but it's you know, we don't know, you know, like we're not scientists, you know, with small teams of 8 people. So I think I would encourage brands, and thank you, Pangaea, for, you know, for opening up those books, so it does make us able to use the right materials and to hopefully have a better fashion.
Yeah, it's kind of democratic rather than tyrannical in a way, right? I think with that's a very good note to end on, and I'd like to thank all my panelists very, very much for all of that wisdom and expertise, and thank you to everyone who came up and who watched online. And is there any questions in the room? Anyone got anything? Yeah, have we got time for questions? Yeah, we do.
Thank you. Sorry, I know we've run over. But I wanted to know, from your perspective, what you think the responsibility of businesses are to educate, which is kind of a conversation that's flowed through. But for example, there are people who can't afford more sustainable options, but I have a lot of people in my network that can afford and do know, like, things are shared on social media now. They are aware of, but they're so disconnected from nature, from the supply chain, and in their own bubble. And part of this, you know, it's not just the fashion industry, things like Amazon, everything, we get it at the snap of our fingers. And we're not going to uproot the capitalistic system tomorrow. So what is there a responsibility for businesses whilst they're innovating and doing this amazing work to change, like, the materials and the production, also to educate? Otherwise, how do people change? Because there are options out there. I try and shop sustainably and go to sustainable businesses, but people don't. So how do we move that?
I think that's the question. I might let you take that one, since you advise businesses, and Ava as well.
I'd be happy. Yeah. I mean, I think, and Pangaea is a great example. I mean, the responsibility, I think, to share what you're doing and to be able to really educate and enlighten people about it is critical. I think, you know, to our last question about what you know, creating regulation or policy around what you can't say, as opposed to, like, do we create policy about what you should say, you know? And I think it's a very interesting question about what is the responsibility to educate consumers, because while this, I'll return to the capitalist model that we're currently under, the current one, and I'm not anti-capitalist, capitalism, but it needs to be conscious capitalism. It needs to be retooled, and I think there is a tremendous amount of responsibility that companies have around telling the truth, but they're not incentivized to do it, because depending on the industry, whether it's personal care, plastics, consumer packaged goods, like, nobody's incentivized to tell the dirty story of where stuff comes from and what happens in the supply chain. And I don't know exactly the answer to it, so I want to turn it to other people, but I think it's an important question.
It's a good question. Thank you. Ava, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I think there is a big responsibility. I think we also have something that's great to talk about. So, but I think it is a responsibility to disclose and help people navigate that space, because it is super, super complicated. We went briefly down the route just on recycled fibers, right? Even that is difficult to navigate. So there is a lot of education needed, and I think brands is in a good position to actually do that, because we have people's ear. We have their attention, and maybe we're even talking about something fun. And if we can also get them to then understand the bigger picture of what they fit into. And sustainable doesn't have to be much more expensive. I know we're at a higher price point because we also work with material innovation, but you can usually find, for instance, in organics and so on, price points that are accessible. But it's about, you know, meeting people where it's convenient for them. So I think price will always come first.
Yeah. But also brands can educate now. If you think about it, the media are not gatekeepers anymore. Like the industry I went into 20 years ago, the media was the gatekeeper, but some of these titles are no longer the gospel anymore, right? So like any brand has its platform, it has content creation, so they have that facility thanks to digital and social media to tell their story, and right? Anything, anyone else got anything to add to that?
I do feel that they can educate, and I feel that they should educate, but I also almost have run out of patience with it. So I feel that there's an element of the legislation up in here, because I just think it's happening, but it's just taking too long. And I think there's like a reluctance to say things because, but I'm not doing this. We get that with the brands we work with. If we step out with you, then we're going to be criticized about all the things we're not doing right, so we won't even bother. And we always say, like, we work, with some of the brands that we've worked with, we're like, put a hurdles page up on your website. Like, just be real. Just say, these are things we're struggling with as a company. Like, how refreshing would that be? Education doesn't always have to be like tooting your horn or just focusing on the things you're doing right. Education can be being transparent about your struggles and the hurdles you're facing. So I think that that's just something brands just need to do. But I am getting to that point now where I'm kind of like, time's going. So like some legislation, please. That's the other part of me where, I'm just ready for that, because I do feel anxious about how time is going,
really
and how
is.
slow things are happening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions at all? No? Okay, I think we'll probably wrap it there. We're at time. Thank you all very, very much. If we could have a round of applause for my panellists here, please. Thank you very, very, very much indeed. Thank you. Well done, everyone.